great.
And hello, everybody. Welcome to WD Carousel of Podcast. My name's Crystal.
And I'm Ian.
And today we are going to do our little homage to Black History Month.
Yes.
And to do that, we had to do some digging, and I'm going to admit it was a lot harder than I expected it to be able to make a good connection for the Disney company to Black history and how it's contributed. And first off, I'm kind of a little disappointed in that.
Yeah, I know we were kind of like, we should definitely do something because we have our conversations, like, what are we going to talk
planning
about?
out what we want to do.
And it's like, we should do something for Black History Month. I'm like, that's a great idea. And then we both were kind of like, so, yeah.
It has a lot more negative connotations than you would think, or
maybe you do. I don't know.
But there was one name that really stood out to us, and it was Floyd Norman, and I was honestly shocked as well that there was not a lot of information on the internet about him either. Now, Floyd Norman is the first Black animator for the Walt Disney Company, period. End of sentence. And he is still working for Disney to this day at, what did they say?
As far as we know, 83
years old?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is a long history with the Disney company. And to not have a lot of people talking about it, speaking to it, acknowledging it, or even just having articles on the internet is...
Right. It's shocking. Yeah, the complete and total lack of information on him. I know you were able to find like a Wikipedia page that was very sparse.
I found a wiki. I found IMDb page.
Yep.
I found NPR article from a few years back, and then there is a Black History website that did mention him too, and gave a little bit of a story, but that was about it.
Yeah.
Though we did find that there is a documentary, which is amazing.
Available on Netflix.
Yes, and I highly recommend watching it. It's also available on iTunes, I saw, and available for purchase through the website specifically for it. You just go to floydnorman.com, and you can purchase it for Blu-ray or be able to download it. And like you said, it's available on Netflix. That's where we watched it. And it gave a lot more rounded of a story about this gentleman.
Yeah.
And it made me even more excited to be able to introduce him to you guys.
Talk a little bit about him, because we didn't know a lot about him until very recently, and he's a Disney legend.
He is. He was inducted into the Disney Legends in 2007, so he's a huge contributor to Disney history. He worked there when the 9 Old Men worked there, and he worked with Disney, and he was one of the vital creators, and he even went so far as, well, I don't want to spoil it, but just huge in the creation of animation and how it has evolved over the years.
Yeah. He was also unique in the fact that he was part of the Disney company fairly early, and as we mentioned, the first African-American hire.
Yes.
Which was really interesting. And he also was the first... he also is interesting in the fact that he wasn't the company man. Because a lot of these guys were the company men, the 9 Old Men, company men, they stuck to Disney until they died kind of thing. He was a guy who was always kind of pushing and looking and doing
He was just in
stuff.
it for the art.
Yeah, he was in it for the art. And not to say that the other guys were
not. No, not at all.
But he really had this incredible desire and push to do the next thing or find the next thing, which made them not always part of the Disney Corporation, which was very interesting.
So let's go back to a little bit of the timeline here. So he was born in 1935, and they had mentioned, and I noticed this a couple different places, that where he really was inspired and decided that this is what he wanted to do for a living was once he actually watched the movie Dumbo. And that's what got him really gung-ho about animation and cartooning and artistry and all of that. And I think that that's really neat how he's just like you and I would be, being inspired by Disney and then being able to, make Disney part of his life. Now, you and I don't work for the Disney company.
Right.
He's one of the lucky ones that did, and is still, but to be able to find that inspiration and get that from the get-go and then be able to follow that life plan is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then he was hired officially at Disney in 1956. And it wasn't, he everywhere that I looked, it said that it wasn't a big deal to him. He wasn't even aware that it was a big deal when he was hired. He didn't think about it being race. He just applied and
he basically
got the job.
I think the words that he used were something to the effect of, I was just an animator looking for a job, was kind of what it came down to. And kind of a little bit about, he kind of in the documentary that he goes through a little bit of his childhood, and he's kind of like, he starts the interview by like, it was hard, I lived impoverished, and he's like, honestly, not really. Like, he's like, I had a pretty uneventful upbringing, and so
happy.
And he grew up, and his family lived in Burbank.
Yes.
And so that he grew up in that area all the time, and so he always kind of had that lifestyle that he was completely disconnected. He always said he was kind of disconnected from the things that were happening during the civil rights era.
The art, the culture, the things that he grew up around with. And segregation wasn't really a thing over in California.
Right, not in the same way.
Yeah, his family was originally from Mississippi, and so he had mentioned when he went back, he had no idea how segregated and how strict everything was, saying this is for white people and then this is for colored people.
Right.
And so when he applied for Disney, he didn't think anything about it. He was just like, I want to work for Disney.
Right. I'm an
animator. And it didn't make sense or even matter to him that Disney had never hired anybody other than white men before.
Right. So it was so looking back on it, it seems like this big thing, but at the time he's like, whatever, like this is me getting a job. And I think that, and he had talked about, and he's always been a defendant of Walt Disney the man. He's always defended him in the allegations that have come about him over over time. And he was like, and people have asked him, do you think Walt Disney was hiring purposefully, that was a purposeful reason that there have been no black people that had worked there before? And he was like, no, he just looked for raw talent.
Yeah, Disney looked for talent.
So he's like, I got the training, I had the passion, I came in, and they hired me. So it was kind of interesting to see it in a light of, he's like, it wasn't really about race at the time. I mean, obviously everything has a racial undertone in this country. That's a thing that happens.
Yes.
But it was interesting to see that it was like, he's like, I was a talented candidate, they hired me. So it kind of is that progressive? I don't know. For 1950, maybe 56, whatever it was, maybe it is.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting. So he started his entire animating career then right there at Disney with the Nine Old Men.
Yep. He told stories in the documentary, and we're going to reference that a lot just because it's the best place that we found for the information, but how one was such a stickler about, like, if you were playing chess with him and he lost, you would see the body being kicked out of the office and stuff being thrown at him. And, or, another one of the Nine Old Men, he'd bring a sketch to, and the Nine Old Man, the illustrator, would grab it and then throw another blank over top of it and just tweak it a little bit and show him and instruct him in how to make it better. And that is amazing education to be getting right then and there.
Absolutely.
And the first movie that he really contributed in was Sleeping Beauty. They had him as what did they call it? An in-betweener?
In-betweener, yeah. And to me, my experience with film is I work mostly in post-production for live films, so everything that I do is more involved with what happens after, like, being filmed with a camera instead of animation. That was like a different department. We crossed paths a little bit, but it wasn't quite the same. But what happened is in my world, they call it keyframing.
Okay.
So now the computer does a lot of the job that the in-betweeners do sometimes. Okay. So for me, not necessarily with true animation and the way that they're talking about, but if I'm animating something that's like moving and bouncing across the screen, I drop in the keyframe. So I'm like, by this frame, I want it to be here. And that's your keyframe. And then the computer will extrapolate in between where the object has to go to make it there in that time.
But Floyd was the one who actually
had to
was given this image and then this image and had to make the sequence to connect the two.
I mean, if you think about it, like, You get two images, you have to literally make the motion happen because it's extraordinarily tricky. I mean, that's a huge job to do. I mean, you have to basically you are the one that's making it come alive.
You're the actual
yeah.
animator.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
you're given a guideline, but then you're the one that actually sets the motion into action. And so they did that, and he said in that movie he primarily worked with the three good fairies, so Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather.
Yep.
And even in the documentary, you saw him sketching little Merryweather's face, which is really, really cute.
Yeah.
Another one that he worked on was Mary Poppins, and he worked with the Sherman Brothers. He was telling a story about him and Richard Sherman.
Yep.
And then Disney came in and was like, I want to make these Butler's penguins. And
everyone's like, what are you talking about, Walt?
And so he helped with that whole animation sequence, which we know as the chalk art section of Mary Poppins.
Yep.
Another movie that he worked in was 101 Dalmatians, and he did a ton of stuff there. We found out that he was even just a few years ago asked to go back and complete the cartoon that the Dalmatians are watching of the canine, when they're watching the television. And so he made a full cartoon off of that.
Like, apparently there were some original storyboard stills that were still in place. And so they're like, hey, we want to do a Blu-ray version of this movie. Do you want to come in and do
the extended little edition?
And do the story for it? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So he came in and did that at, age 79 or 80 or whatever he was at the time. So it's very cool to see. And that's...
Didn't he say it was like going back to the 60s?
Yes, he's like, this is right back like being in the 60s, because that's how they animated the whole thing. I mean, obviously they had computer assistants, but they hand animated basically that whole segment. So.
And he didn't just do animation either, or the in-betweens. He also eventually moved to storyboarding.
Yes.
And so one thing that I learned was Disney does not write out the plot first and then go into storyboarding. No, the ideas of the movie come to storyboarding, and then they are either kept or kicked out, and the movie changes off of the pictures and not off of what the actual script is, and the script comes after. I had no idea that that's how it was done.
Yeah, it's
or at least with Disney.
Yeah, it's very interesting that and I know that Pixar does it very similarly, where they do a lot of the work in the room while they're storyboarding it. It's like this very, very on the fly kind of style of making a story, which is just crazy for me to think about, like that kind of level of just ad hoc kind of work. But it kind of makes it interesting, because you get a lot of people working on the story at once, which is kind of neat.
And then he tells a story about how he was doing the storyboards for the Jungle Book, and he was working on Kaa, Mowgli's character, and the interaction that they have. And he said he was in the room with Walt and was like trying to stay out of his field of vision whenever, because Walt, he didn't want to disappoint Walt. Nobody wants to disappoint Walt.
Right.
And so he kept like jumping and trying to stay out of his field of vision while Walt was going through the storyboard saying, yes, this, no, this. And then at one point in time, he was like, we need a Sherman Brothers song for this.
Right.
And so that little sketch that he did of Kaa and Mowgli actually became the full sequence as we know it, and became a more important part of that film, which is amazing. And then when Walt died, he decided that it was time to leave the Walt Disney Studios and try something different. He and Leo, I don't remember his last name. Hold, please. This is important.
Yes, it is.
Oh, now we get a lot more stuff on Floyd Norman.
Funny.
I just should have looked up his actual company. So, Leo and Floyd left Disney and started their own company called Vignette Films, Inc. And it focused primarily on Black history, which is amazing.
They were also commercial, so they did work for other people too, but the work that they did in-house was for Black history. A lot of it, Black historical important things that they would cover.
Leo Sullivan?
Leo Sullivan, that sounds right.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yep, Leo Sullivan.
There we go. Okay, yeah. So those two, and there were two other guys involved too, but those two were kind of the main.
And they were like
two.
permanent partners in crime as
Yeah.
well. They
Yeah.
worked with Disney together. They left Disney together. Some of them, like they told a story about how Leo got a job at one business and then would
Right.
sneak Floyd in
yeah.
to be able to work essentially for free, but they were just so happy to just be working together.
Exactly. So it was very interesting. So they did all that. They went to Alabama with a 16 millimeter Bolex they bought off Roy E. Disney, and
Roy's camera went and recorded the riots.
Yep. So that was a thing that happened, which is amazing, and they covered all of this. And that footage ended up going on NBC, CBS, I mean,
millions of people
those
saw
riots.
it.
Yeah. So that was very interesting. I mean, that was from an animator. Like, he was like, let's try this too, and he got himself there, and it was successful. It's pretty amazing.
And then they decided they were going to they went back to Disney for a little bit, and then Disney fired them again.
Yep.
And then they went to Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah, they were both at were they both at Hanna-Barbera? I don't know that Leo was.
I don't know if Leo was, but I know that Hanna-Barbera was a big point for Floyd as well.
Yep.
Because he went from making such huge motion picture films to, the everyday sketches. And it doesn't matter how refined this is. He says he hates Scooby-Doo now because he's drawn so many Scoobies.
He's like, I hate that dog, and it's because he had to animate him all that time, and it sounded like that those guys at Hanna-Barbera were just like, it was just like, let's get it done. And
he made a comparison to Hanna-Barbera, the studio, being like the early days of Walt at Hyperion, where it was, fun and engaging atmosphere where everybody was working off of everybody. And during that time, he became a writer for different cartoons too. So add another job to his list of accomplishments that he's done. But he was writing episodes. At first he wasn't sure, he said, and then he saw who wrote this episode. He's like, oh, I can write better than that. And so he just did. Yeah. And he was there, he said, for what, about 10 years?
Yeah.
Something like
that.
And then ended up going back to Disney again.
Might have been 6, but I can't remember for sure.
And then went back to Disney again.
Yep.
And then was offered a position at this little non-known company working on a tiny little movie called Toy Story.
Yeah, so he had been offered a job at Pixar, like right when they were working on development, and he had just signed a contract with Disney, so he didn't. But by the time that the second Toy Story film had rolled in, he jumped. They asked him again,
he was
and he jumped. He was all in at that point.
He was ready for it. So he worked on Toy Story 2. He worked on Monsters, Inc. through Pixar as well. And then he went back to Disney. And he told the story about how he'd be working in one department and then he'd be laid off, but then another department would grab him real quick. So it was basically just jumping from one building to another building within the Disney world and the Disney complex.
Yeah.
Up until the age of 65. And then at 65, he was basically forced into retirement, and nobody knows why. There were Disney animators that had been older that were able to keep working. There was the under sense that it might have been because he was still only an animator and hadn't moved up to producer or director.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't as big of a contributor as some others. But basically what happened was when he was kicked out at 65, he found ways to sneak back onto the property and stayed. One of the websites that I did some research on said that, when they took away his office, he basically came back a couple weeks later and found a vacant one and kind of just squatted there.
Yeah.
And they even showed on the documentary that the name badge at the door for where his office is actually has another person's name.
Yeah.
It says Ron Husband.
Yeah.
But instead of Ron, he taped over a piece of paper with his wife's name on it.
Yeah, so Adrian's husband was written up there because she works at Disney Publishing, and so he just would ride to work with her or drive her to work or whatever, and then he would just stay. and then he would just kind of wander around in the property, and
they nicknamed it Floydering.
Floydering. And everyone talks about him now, that still works there. They're like, oh yeah, we love it when he comes in and just like hangs out or whatever. He's just that guy. He's very much like has that Disney kind of spirit where he's just all over the place and everyone knows him.
And to have that connection back to the originators of Disney as well, that little touchstone, because the people who are animating now, the people who are working right now for Disney don't have that connection back to the
Nine Old Men
or Disney himself or the originating feeling of the company.
Right.
They're just trying to move forward with what Disney as they know. But through Floyd, they're able to get that sense. And I know at one point in time, Floyd's like, the old men that you look to and respect somehow.
I
eventually became the old fart.
He's like, one day I realized I was an old fart. It's I kind of get it though. Like, the guy is like, in the video, he was like 79. He seemed like he was maybe 65. Like, he just he did not act like he was very old, or he doesn't even have an energy that seemed like he was very old.
He has a very youthful spirit to him, and I feel like it's probably due to him still being active, being up to date, and constantly keeping that childish energy to him as far as creativity and imagination and all of that goes.
I mean, he was a guy that started off in the 50s doing, classic animation, doing that very, very manual work, and then jumped over to Pixar and had no problem jumping into a brand new cutting-edge 3D workflow.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't care. Like, he can... And so when he came back to work on stuff, they're like, hey, you want to work on blah, blah, blah? Do you do digital? Yeah, he has no problem. He'll jump in and work on whatever platform you throw at him.
They said he's one of the few people where if they say, do you want to do this technology? He's not hesitant at all versus people who are younger than him being like, no, I don't do that. I don't touch that.
Yeah.
He had no problem with it. He would just go for it.
Yeah.
And that is a huge thing to commend about keeping up and keeping youthful. So it's just, he's such a great guy. And even... to this day, they were showing pictures of him just doing these one-off sketches of characters that he was known for, and he'd like paint them and then would give them away as presents or one-off commissions and that sort of thing. And that would be an amazing little trinket to have.
Oh, it's absolutely would be worth so much. He just and so he had been fired, and it really got to him. The last time he was 65, he couldn't believe it because he didn't feel like he was done yet. And so when he got a couple of things he started to work on after that, where they would keep coming in to kind of do a consulting sort of thing over and over again, and finally they just rehired him.
Yeah.
He just went from being a retiree, where he had his retiree badge, and he went back to being an actual employee of the Walt Disney Company again, because he wasn't done. There was more he had to do, and his wife told him that. She's like, "You're not done yet. I'm telling you, you're not done yet." And so he gets to go back and do what he loves, and all the other filmmakers and directors and animators they talked to were all like, "Yeah, we wouldn't just retire. Like, that's not something that we would do. We're gonna go until we can't go. But it's not just like your 9-to-5 job. It's a passion." So it was a really nice. The whole feeling of it was really nice to see that he came back and is being recognized in a way where he's been a Disney legend. He's been brought back in. They're bringing him back to do work. He's an employee. Like, his legacy is going to be recognized by Disney in the end.
And you'll still even find him, even to this day, at Comic-Con.
Yes.
Doing events and meet and greets there and signing autographs. They showed a little clip of them doing this. Basically, it's an improv sketch game.
Yeah,
and
that looked really cool.
That looked super fun.
Yeah.
And I would love to be able to see that.
Yeah.
But he's still around. He's still doing things and being what do they call him? A cranky old man? No, it was because they said he was an animator. He was a story writer, and he was I don't know.
I don't remember either.
It was something sassy like that.
Yeah, very sassy. He seems like he is very sassy. When he got mad, he made like really like nasty cartoons of like the Disney executives. But they let him back anyway. But I mean, it was all very clever.
And that's how Disney actually found out about him, they said.
Right.
So going back, when he was getting frustrated just being the in-betweener, the assistant in-betweener.
Yes.
He was an assistant to the in-betweener.
Yeah.
He said it was normal that the artists would sketch up situations about each other and would post them. And he didn't do that to get recognition, but Disney was such a hands-on person that he would be walking the halls and he noticed them, and that's what really caught his eye and brought Floyd in to be able to do the Three Good Fairies in the movie and kind of propelled him from there. So
really an amazing person in just the history of Disney in general, not just like Black history. Like, he's definitely a person that needs to be recognized in his contributions to what he's done for the film industry, for the the Walt Disney Company especially. I mean, he's had a a career that's had his hands in Disney work sent from 1956 to today.
They said amazing. It was the easiest decision to do a Disney legend.
Yeah.
They were like, this was the easiest one to decide when they proposed to have Floyd on there. And so that's great that he's finally being recognized and still being appreciated, and this is our little appreciation for him as well, because like we said originally, there's not a lot on him, and for the amount that he's contributed to just the world of entertainment in general, there should be more appreciation. And so this is our little tip of the hat saying we appreciate and we see you and thank you so much for all the hard work that you've done, and we're here to support you for all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was very cool. It was a fun documentary, so if you get a chance to watch it, I don't remember the name of it now.
Floyd Norman.
Floyd Norman, yeah. We'll call Floyd Norman. But yeah.
An Animated Life or something like that.
Yeah, so something on Netflix and iTunes and Blu-ray from the web. So all available. Really, really a fun watch. Great character, great person, great history. So, yeah, absolutely.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening and watching. My name's Crystal.
And I'm Ian.
And this has been WD Carousel of Podcast. We hope you have a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. Bye, everybody.
Beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.